Hello and welcome to the Marketing Trail Guide podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Krushevich, founder of Marketing Trail Guide and fractional chief marketing officer for companies running on the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. In this first season, Opportunities in Crisis, I've been talking with business leaders and entrepreneurs about how to survive and thrive in times of uncertainty. This is episode 15, focusing on product experience with Adam Robinson. Adam is an expert marketer in the supply chain and logistics industry, and we discuss how providing a better experience in delivery, wrapping, and packaging of the product has become just as important as the product itself. Adam notes the importance of marketing and customer experience to be coordinated and aligned with the supply chain in order to deliver a superior user experience. And so without further delay, here's my interview with Adam Robinson. Adam, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Adam, we got to know each other, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I lose track, but we did a little work together and some messaging work for your employer and a couple of your clients as well. And you work in the shipping and the third-party logistics industry. And I think a lot of people understand that freight moves out there and products get to us somehow, but don't have a lot of visibility into how that actually happens. And there's a whole ecosystem around that. Maybe we could just start with, talking about big picture, how products move and what are the stakeholders and kind of the major categories involved in moving product from place to place.
Yeah, well, I think, it's never more evident, I think, during the current pandemic that we're all facing. I believe that one of the first big examples the public really found a lot of interest around was toilet paper, where, there were demand shocks on the supply chain because we started panic buying toilet paper as if we're going to run out of that anytime soon. And what happens in that instance, and the reason we saw a shortage was because no one saw a demand forecast where we'd be buying up toilet paper in the middle of a pandemic. I think we would have probably focused more on other things like beans, but right. The end result is toilet paper, if you will, from that. But what we're seeing there in that process is a supplier of toilet paper, let's say that's Procter & Gamble, who's really seeing a huge demand on their supply chain for a commodity. In this instance, it's toilet paper. And in order to respond to that and really change the supply chain in real time to respond to that demand, that company, Procter & Gamble, is going to have to work with literally thousands of entities in order to course correct.
Thousands of entities.
Thousands, different suppliers, carriers, locations, facilities, individual stores, distribution centers. They're also going to work with their third-party logistics provider to help coordinate all of that. They're going to have freight brokers involved in order to secure full truckloads of toilet paper capacity so that can get to where it needs to go. And so inherent in all of those thousands of communications and thousands of process just to get a toilet paper package back to Walmart and replenished, they're going to need to communicate with all of those people effectively, coordinate and execute documentation and contracts with a lot of people, understand their payment terms, and of course, at any time gain visibility into that process, not only in their own organization, but to make sure all of those people who are coordinating with them have visibility into it as well. So yes, the supply chain literally is a bunch of people linked up, and just like any good chain, it's only as strong as its weakest link. And if anybody in those processes and communications aren't really informed or aren't aware, then it's really much harder to replenish that toilet paper for the public. And, toilet paper is just one aspect of that. Let's think about the personal protective equipment supply chain. Sure. There's a lot of desperation, right? Toilet paper is one thing. I think we're okay if we don't get that for a couple of days. But when it comes to PPE, that supply chain and the importance of it and all of the players, communication and visibility, it really dramatically increases the desperation around it, and the chance for error increases greatly. And so the supply chain really needs to make sure that during these processes, or in general, that they're all coordinated and on the same page. And in today's environment, increasingly, they're leaning on technology and strategic partners to do that.
So this just came to mind. Tim Cook, who's now, of course, the CEO of Apple, prior to that was the COO, as my recollection serves, and he's thought to be kind of the logistics and supply chain wizard. What's the relative importance for maybe not only a business the size of Apple Computer or Apple now, but in general, if there's physical product to move? How important is that in the bigger scheme of things, and how does that come into play in terms of the ability for a company to succeed in a bull market, a bear market, or whatever you want to call what we're in right now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, especially as you point to the bear or the bull market, right? I think if you asked an MBA student, a financial MBA student at Stanford, or even a professor, they would tell you, oh yeah, recessions are like clockwork. They run about every 4 years. Why? Because there's this endless cycle of, at least in the 80s, saying, okay, well, we're gonna get inventory, we're gonna boost up on that, and inventory is cash. We're gonna do that to meet demand, and we're not very good at predicting demand right now. We don't have a lot of visibility into it. So eventually, we're gonna have too much inventory and not enough demand, and so that would create almost a cyclical, predictable recession. Mm-hmm. However, in the last 10 years, I would say, let's say 12 years even, from 2008, because of a crisis then, 12 years ago, the financial crisis, the stock crisis, and the credit market crisis, the supply chain was forced to change. That's often what happens. And then what happened is, because of things like smartphones in 2008, with the iPhone launching in 2007, as we got more cloud computing, as more people leveraged smart technology on the internet, supply chains responded in kind. And they got better at predicting inventory and demand capabilities. They got better at getting visibility into their processes. They started using machine learning and algorithms, the things that Google had done pretty early on with our search history, and applying that to supply chain. And they were able to do better at maximizing inventory through just-in-time or lean methodologies. And as we saw throughout the ages, companies like Amazon and Apple, and those who really put an emphasis on meeting consumer demand and fulfilling marketing promises by the great Steve Jobs or the great Jeff Bezos, or Bezos, however you want to say it, it was down to Dave Clark at Amazon and Tim Cook at Apple to fulfill that.
Right.
Now, the most recent article of Dave Clark was talking about, in highlighting him in Entrepreneur Magazine as this great next leader at Amazon. Well, we see Tim Cook as CEO now at Apple. And so we're now increasingly see that the executives at these multi-billion, sometimes trillion-dollar companies are putting everything they can strategically, investment-wise and technology-wise, into the supply chain so that they can respond to these new disruptions, right, like we're seeing today, right, at a very high level and very successfully. So it's
very
infinitely
quickly,
important.
Yeah, very quickly respond to what's happening in the moment. And it's almost, tell me if this is an oversimplification, but it's almost like, you build a robust, flexible, nimble supply chain, and then you could feed any product into it. And so it's almost like, I don't want to overstate that, products become less important, because there's a whole discipline of understanding your market and developing products and so forth. But once you have a brand with a relationship with a client and you have some trust built, and you have a supply chain that is not only functional, but can excel at being nimble in responding to some of these market forces, now you can almost feed almost any product into that supply chain. And it's almost like, well, is the product just the widget, or is the product the whole customer experience that you can deliver now?
I think that's what you're going to start seeing. A little bit of commoditization when it comes to product, and it will be about the experience. We all still drink milk. In 1960, they drank milk. But I guarantee you, those milk providers who provide a better experience than their competitors, is the carton dead? Should we still be using the carton? It's the delivery of that product, the wrapping of that product, the packaging of that product that now become more important almost than the product itself. But then if you don't follow through on the usage of that product's experience, maybe it's a AirPod that, brought me some really nimble listening, or the Google Pixel that's sitting over here that, creates amazing images and feeds directly into my Google Photo Hub, and the pictures I take yesterday of my kids is instantly on my virtual slideshow of my memories of life, then that's what keeps me staying, right? But there's so much opportunity for something to go wrong today. And so that's why the supply chain and customer experience continue in a Venn diagram to become a circle, right? Those two must be coordinated and in line. And so more and more, you're going to start to see marketing and customer service people work hand in hand with supply chain people in order to work on things like customer experience.
Right. So that last mile of getting product to the customer, and by last mile, we can think about how that's changed even. I used to go into a restaurant and it's strange to even say that, right? I mean, it's crazy, but we used to go into restaurants. Remember that? We used to go into restaurants, and the last mile of that product was me showing up at some establishment, ordering something, and it just showed up at my table. And I sure hope to God that comes back sometime soon, and maybe things are starting to reopen. And actually, I'm going to be going out to dinner on Friday this coming week for the first time in I don't even remember how long, months and months. But
remember your manners.
That's right. But that is a delivery system too, right? So we've all heard maybe about these ghost kitchens, right? That are, some shipping container that somebody stood up a kitchen in overnight and is now delivering 100% of their product via Postmates. That's a different supply chain and logistics mechanism. And that has a host of implications for retail, brick and mortar. And I'm not one of those people that says, it's all going that direction. But what are your thoughts on, even our experience of retail and how supply chain is going to be affecting that, given not only COVID, but now with demonstrations and riots, all over the place, and more fear, not less than it was last week.
Yeah, definitely. It's a time of chaos and change. And in those times, typically the supply chain responds. And there's a bunch of supply chains, right? I could look at what I do in marketing and developing content. And that's its own supply chain, from ideation to sourcing ideas to production to delivery to distribution to amplification, right, and experience around that content. So I think more and more what we're going to start to see in the world that we live in is, one, a deeper understanding of process and production. Two, the application of technology around those to automate it. And three, so we can all inherently focus back on people. It's an emotional time. It's a very tough psychological time. More and more people are going to be staying at home more often than ever. But I think what we're seeing is more people are still willing to spend money and either make their home an amazing experience themselves and buy a bunch of different products. And those companies who had already thought about this pre-COVID or pre-disruption are going to do much better. Companies like Ulta, right? They may have a storefront, but they have a very strong omni-channel approach to things, meaning, they don't really care where, Ulta Beauty, they don't really care where you are. Right. We're going to bring the experience and deliver it to you no matter your comfort level of going in the store. And if you're more experiential, they're going to make it more, about makeup, and they're going to give you makeovers. It's going to be like a day at the spa almost, with products around you. If it's at home, they're going to really focus on packaging, right? Birchbox has done this really, really well. The personalization even goes through onto their label. It says the fabulous Amber Robinson, my wife. It has those little adjectives that make you feel good about it. Or it might be really nice when you open it up, and you'll have this amazing experience and virtual guides that bring you into that experiential in-store thing, but it's more virtual. And so I think we're going to start to see really a blending of supply chain and marketing and customer service to where it will almost be no difference. And I can say this firsthand as my new role here at Turvo, and I'm sure we'll get more into that in a second. But when it comes to product marketing, right, I'm right there alongside the developers and the product managers of new products at Turvo, ideating how people experience this, not just from a messaging and marketing standpoint, but from a user's standpoint? What's the emotional change for them?
Right.
How will this impact them? And we have to be in concert with that. We have to plan for those things. And product managers are going to be more like marketers, and marketers more like product managers, and vice versa. And so it's going to be really, really tough to tell the difference between employees, I think, in 10 to 15 years and which departments they work at, right? Our kids all will have the capability of what you and I are doing right now, by the way. And they may be what we are, marketers, but heck, they may just be coders. But I guarantee they'll all understand how to deliver effectively a good experience and a good message.
Yeah. So there's this integration and this cross-pollination, and maybe some of the silos are coming down, is what I hear you saying. And I think that has really interesting implications for whether you're a product company, whether you're a service company, whether you do both. What it's going to take to get those customers. I mean, I think it's always the case that every sale matters, but especially right now, every sale matters and every customer interaction matters, in the middle of all this. And so I think we're going to see a watershed too of companies that can and will do this and companies that simply won't. I don't know, what's your perspective on that, of companies that maybe aren't even paying attention to this at all?
Well, I feel sorry for them. And I understand that it looks like a lot of work, because it is. And re-engineering your culture, re-engineering your approach to what you do, and really taking a step back and saying, where can I smartly invest right now where I don't have a lot of appetite for risk, or maybe even a lot of capital to invest that gets me results? So I think increasingly analytics have to be a big part of your transformation. Mm-hmm. And I think your transformation also has to be, and I hate to use the buzzword of the day, but it has to digitize. But what does that really mean? To me, it just means creating a digital twin of your analog fundamentals that have always worked. And I think if you step back to your fundamentals, and when you started your company, and if you're a business leader and you're saying, why did I create my company? And you really do that work to take a step back and say, who am I trying to reach? What is the real problems that they have? And how do I help them overcome those problems to get them to a better place? And if you're an executive who hasn't done that in 5 to 10 years, especially 10 years where we're now 2 major financial and crisis events behind us, then you might be missing out on an opportunity to create what I think is the crux of digitization, whether it's in marketing or having your company adopt digitization processes in the way you operate. Mm-hmm. Is that the crux of it is relevance, right? Are you really relevant to their problems today, or are you relevant to their problems 10 years ago? And I guarantee if you're not thinking about how your operations play into your delivery of that product or service and your marketing messaging of that product and service, and you're not tying those things together, again, I go back to, I feel sorry for you, because you are going to get left behind. Yeah. And you have to then pull through whatever work you do, whatever you put in place, what are the analytics around that? And you better be a data-driven individual who is not just seeking out data, but seeking out insights and maybe soon predictive analytics that tell you where you need to go with your business, whether it's in supply chain, marketing, or customer service, so that you can continue to gain market share and be prepared to be thriving once things get back to a sense of normalcy.
So much good stuff in there. What I think is interesting is 25 years ago, we saw kind of the advent of the internet, and so much has changed since then. It used to be that enterprise was the only one that could set some of these trends and set expectation for what digitization would mean. But now we live in a direct to consumer model where I can go onto Amazon, and it doesn't show up in my house in a day or two, I'm already angry. And so now corporations in that, call it $1 to $100 million space, are dealing with a population that have such a high expectation, because the trillion and multi-billion, hundreds of billions of dollars of companies are doing business directly with their customer and have set the expectation, they've set the bar here. How in the world can the 5, 10, 20, $50 million company compete in terms of experience? Does every company need a CTO? Does every company need to be, we talk about digitization. Is every company really a software company? Is that what needs to happen? And how do you, as a $10 million or $20 million company, even compete with that?
Well, I think you have to kind of look at how technology has democratized the access to capability, right? And I think you'd be surprised as a business owner what's out there for you to leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take, for example, and I think you run your email through Google Enterprise. From what I remember.
Yep.
And through that Google Suite comes a slew of tools that can give you instant collaboration called Google Docs, where, as an example, in a small marketing firm or any firm where you need to work together on documents, it just makes it more seamless in that experience as you work with your customers. Maybe it's not Google Docs. Maybe it's implementing some sort of digital contract through DocuSend or one of those Adobe programs that are relatively cheap in order to do that. So I think what I'm really getting at is here, you have to take that step back, as I said earlier, and say, what are my current processes? Where am I an analog process where it takes more time?
Yep.
And you criticize that, right? And I think what you do is you objectively say, is that a good experience for the customer? Is it hard for them to do this? Is it hard for my team to do this?
Right.
If in that hard process, what we might determine hard or time intensive, is that allowing me to get time with my customer, right? So I think you have to analyze each part of your business and say, do I even need to throw technology at this or not? Because sometimes you don't. Sometimes even my quarterly business review that takes 2 hours to do in a meeting with my customer, it has traditionally been some of the best time spent with them. We've got more done that way. And it may mean that say, I like that. How do I replicate that? And so you have to then start really applying then key performance indicators around those processes. And if you do invest in technology or you do digitize that process, I think you needed to have created a baseline pre-change and look at what those metrics are post-change. So measure everything you change. That's critical too.
Absolutely. Adam, I want to take a break. And when we come back, we'll keep going.
I'll never forget the look on my wife's face when the doctor gave us the news. Although he tried to break it to us gently, as soon as he said the word cancer, we knew our lives would never be the same. If it was me that was sick, that I could handle. But not one of my babies. Over the next few months, our battle for life took us far from home and into a confusing world of surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Sleepless nights at the hospital were followed by weeks of living apart. While the hospital was doing a great job caring for our daughter, we were struggling to keep our little family together. With money running out and our marriage being tested and our other daughter suffering from the strain, we were barely hanging on. While you might know it as the Ronald McDonald house, for us it will always be our own personal miracle. And we're not the only ones who've experienced this magical place. From the moment we walked through the front doors, we knew this was special. While it was great to have a place so close to the hospital where a whole family could stay together, we soon realized this was so much more than a house. The staff and volunteers were unbelievable. They made us feel like we were the most important guests that had ever stayed there. It wasn't until later that we found out they make all the guests feel that way. Having our own private room to retreat to when things got rough was something we really appreciated. And when we didn't feel like being alone, the chance to share a meal with other families who were going through the exact same thing as us was so powerful. In fact, that turned out to be one of the most important parts of our stay, sharing our pain with other people who truly understood. Some of those people will be friends of ours for the rest of our lives. Coming back from a long day at the hospital, it was great to walk into the house and be treated to a meal prepared by these amazing volunteers. At the house, they call them meals of love or happy meals. To us, they were part of the miracle. The fact that there were people who cared this much for us was huge. It really was. It meant much more than just a meal. One of our favorite things about the house was the laundry room. While this may sound a little strange, doing laundry together was one of the most normal things we had done in months. And to have internet access and computers, and a place for the kids to play, and transportation, and outdoor space to have a barbecue, and so much more. And then there were those things that no one would have ever expected. I'll admit, I cried the day that the local hair salon came to the house and cut and styled my wife's hair. It had been so long since she had taken any time for herself, and the difference it made for her is hard to describe. I had that same feeling when Lisa delivered a gift basket to our room that included a bathrobe and slippers and some other things that made my wife feel special. It was so unexpected, yet so wonderful. And as if that wasn't enough, I need to tell you about Camp Ronald McDonald for good times. When our doctor first suggested that our daughter go to camp, we could not even imagine it. How could a child who was weak from chemo and radiation go to camp? But when we found out that there were medical facilities and volunteer doctors and nurses, and that cancer patients had been attending this camp for 30 years, we thought we'd give it a try. And then our little girl had a chance to do something that she had only heard about from her friends. She got to go to camp. Swimming, archery, hiking, horseback riding, and even a 50-foot climbing wall were all part of the magical week that she will never forget. It was on our way home from camp that we realized that the Ronald McDonald House Charities is so much more than a house.
Our 6 houses in Los Angeles, Orange County, Loma Linda, Pasadena, Bakersfield, and Long Beach truly are magical places. When you also consider our family rooms located inside local hospitals, our camp for children and families battling cancer, our college scholarship program for deserving high school seniors, and the $600,000 in annual grants we give to other charities serving children, I hope you would agree that we are much, much more than a house.
Well, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with Adam Robinson of Turvo Inc. And Adam is playing a lot of roles, wearing a lot of hats there. Adam, I wonder if we could just jump into your history at your previous company and what were some of the things that you were doing and some of the things that you observed from the marketing seat there, and tell us kind of how that how you got into the place where you are now at Turvo and what Turvo even is.
Yeah. So I'll start kind of where I was at Cerasis, right? 10 years ago, almost 8 years. We can round up to 10. Time is fun like that. But about 8 years ago, I joined Cerasis. I was kind of doing my own thing after leaving a social media startup. Had a couple of clients and was doing just fine. Went to the zoo that summer with my kids. First time out on my own. I was loving it, right? And so a headhunter approached me with the Cerasis opportunity, and I'm always look at any opportunity in business kind of guy. Conversations are free. So the headhunter kind of explained that Cerasis was in the logistics and supply chain space, and I'd never really worked in there except for one maybe client with a little bit of time, but nothing too deeply. And so he'd started his work on setting up the interview with the owners, and I had done what I do with any client, whether they were a day job or a client on the side. And I did a little bit of market research around search engine optimization and what was the digital marketing landscape and what did the competition look like? And, oh yeah, what did LTL stand for? It stands for less than truckload. I know that now. So I went to the interview and I presented in the interview almost a proposal like I do for a client. And I said, you guys have a lot of opportunity here. You have a lot of opportunity to dominate in search engine optimization, even comparative to your largest competitor, which at the time was C.H. Robinson, and they were a $13 billion company. And from my perspective, it really looked like that Ceresis could make a big splash with very cheap investment in simply hiring me and doing some content marketing. So we did that starting out about 8 years ago, and really had a goal simply at first to publish a search engine optimized blog post each business day. Also at the same time, we search engine optimized the website and redid it for the first time in the company's, at that time, 14-year history. And one of the things I think that made us successful there was that we out-executed the competition, oftentimes with an initiative or a goal of a blog post per day. And eventually we added on a white paper, and we added on things like op-eds and case studies. And of course, we didn't do that all at once because we didn't want to break our resources and our team. But as we continued to execute and we had a foundation of that asset, whether it's the blog, we moved up, right? We kept building the pyramid, building the infrastructure, making it even more solid, making sure everything was optimized. And we started to rank in search engines. We started to get inbound leads. We continued to execute and never give up. And those who gave up, just like we didn't, we stayed consistent. We continued to pass them. And we took a website that had about 700 visits a month, primarily people just logging into our technology platform, to at its peak over 200,000 visitors per month, putting it up there as one of the most visited logistics and supply chain websites on the planet. And that's because we saw a gap in the market. We executed every day after putting a plan together, and we never stopped. And we were able to build a foundation that whenever somebody said, "Hey, Adam, guess what? We now have the capability to do final mile." I basically was a button pusher, right? I was a lever puller. And I said, okay, plug it into the blog, plug it into the next white paper, put it into the podcast. Let's do a case study, get some customer testimonials, put it up to the publications, bam, bam, boom. And then people knew about Final Mile. Mm-hmm. And we were generating massive amounts of leads to a point where we generated, probably over 15,000 inbound inquiries, of which we filtered. And I was pretty stringent on what I considered sales qualified leads. So it became about 2,000 sales qualified leads, which grew the company in that 8.5-year period from about 40 million to a run rate of 200 million in the last year that I was there, to selling the company eventually to the 8th largest freight broker, Global Trans, in early this year, February of 2020.
So I want to jump in on that success real quick. I mean, that's incredible. And I want to pick it apart for a minute. You and I have talked about the difference between paying the bills this month and your retirement plan as it pertains to content marketing versus ad spend. Can you break that down for our audience? And what is the relative purview and scope for each of those kind of models?
Yeah, sure. So everybody understands, I think, at this point, you get a job straight out of college, and if you're a smart person, you start investing in your 401k every day. Now, us youngins at 22, 23, we want as much money as we can because we got to have a good time. But the smart and wise ones will say, you know what, I'm willing to give a little bit up for my retirement. So that's the two models that you have straight out of college. And you have the day job, the W-2, and you have the 401k. Now, the day job is a little bit like advertising. Let's say you're a company starting out with a marketing program. Advertising is going to be sort of a constant, sort of like your salary over time amount. It's also going to help you pay the bills, right? And the goal, hopefully, just like your day job, is that you make a little bit more, so you have a little bit of cash after all expenses that you can either save or have fun with. You can reinvest in yourself or maybe buy something for yourself. Just like a business, that marketing advertising, it's easy to place, it stays constant, it can get you a little bit of profit. But just like that college graduate on day one, if you start depositing a little bit into your 401k, right, over time, that 401k is going to exponentially outpace your day job, right? And so it's going to be your real wealth model. And you don't have to do much, but sit there and enjoy it upon your retirement. Now, what's a little bit different in the model of marketing, advertising stays constant, but the work of content marketing and messaging and SEO, you put a little bit of those deposits in and work execution every single day. and it'll happen a lot faster. You don't have to wait till retirement to get the payoff.
Right.
Eventually, the website visits, the engagement, and the inbound qualified leads you generate from those are higher quality. They're more, and you don't have to do as much to continue to stay at that level. And so it's that wealth model for you, and it's maybe not visible in the beginning, but if you're patient and you execute and you continue with those daily deposits, eventually that search engine optimization and with that good messaging on your website, it will absolutely pay off and get you that same reality that we saw in our growth from 40 to 200 million at Cerasis.
I think that's a great analogy. It's really helpful for people to think about the importance of both. It's not one or the other. I think it's also about, as somebody responsible for marketing, setting proper expectation for when the payoff comes, and not having kind of a mismatch in terms of, well, we're gonna write some blog articles and it's just gonna turn around into leads and ROI, next month. That's not quite how it works. But I think you were among one of the earlier adopters and earlier practitioners of content marketing. Did you have an early mover advantage? And is it harder now to jump into content marketing? And does it take longer to ramp up?
Yeah, definitely. I got advantage of an early mover. There were different social media algorithms at that time, different Google algorithms at that time. So, just like the financial markets, I think it's silly to not pay attention to how those things change and impact your 401k deposits. And in this case, the algorithms are a little bit like of the search engines, and social media platforms are a little like the markets. And so I think I encourage people to kind of understand the changes in algorithms. And so today there's obviously more people doing content marketing, especially in the supply chain space. I think I had contributed to that, which is fine. I think more competition is a great thing. It actually ups the quality of the content. It makes sure that we're varying our content assets, that blogs aren't just the only thing anymore. Just like we have here, we have podcasts, we have video podcasts, we have lives on LinkedIn, on Instagram, all over the place. We have different types of content, right? Customer testimonials, quick video snippets to put into social media to help with your algorithms there, a YouTube or a Vimeo strategy, because Google and the search engines really love published video. So I think today it is harder for the average marketer, but I think there's a lot more resources for executives looking to hire that kind of talent than there ever was before. Right. There's a lot more clarity on what works and what doesn't. We were kind of the wild, wild west when I started out doing this stuff in 2008, 2009, where we were just figuring it out. There were no business Facebook pages. LinkedIn was not owned by Microsoft. Right. Things weren't as mature. So I think today it is harder because there's more competition, but it really makes you take a step back and strategically align what you're doing with the rest of your business. So I think for anyone out there, it's critical that in the strategy and planning phase that you take your time, and that when you're getting ready to ideate something like a content plan, that you record that data, that you collaborate with your team, that you don't just let it be siloed into the marketing team, that you bring in sales, that you bring in customer service, that you bring in product, and you say, are they getting, their due in this content? Does it speak too much about ourselves? Is it geared towards the audience and their problems? Yeah. Does it speak ultimately to the themes we're trying to talk about? So it requires a lot more work than ever before.
So we hear a lot these days about brands that are more human, and I feel like that's intensified even the last 6 months, and what we've all been going through. Empathy, the approach to the relationship that's not pushing product, and the whole inbound methodology has actually believed that philosophically from the very beginning. Could you talk about kind of the inbound versus outbound assumptions that are behind content marketing?
Yeah, I think nobody really, is going to be attracted to your blog long term if all you're talking about is your latest new product. I think that people want to be educated. They love to buy, don't get me wrong, but they also want to deal with experts. And I kind of think about the mechanic methodology, right? So historically, mechanics when it comes to transparency, I would say that they've gotten a bad rap. And you can go to a mechanic and you're going in to change your oil, and the guy says, well, your carburetor's out and you need to give me $2,000 today or your car's not going to be able to leave this building. And I'm ignorant around that stuff. And I might just pay that. And I might find out from a friend a week and a half later and says, Adam, you got hoodwinked.
And you'll never go back.
Yeah.
You'll never go back.
You didn't need that carburetor change. He goes, you really need to talk to my boy, Michael. Michael always, when I go in for an oil change, he says, hey, look, you got this thing that's doing just fine. Got a little bit of this that's going on that might lead to the carburetor failing in 2 years. If I were you, I would definitely, replace this $2 part to save you having to replace your carburetor in 2 years. He's already explained and been transparent about his process. He's educated me a little bit, and he's not taking my money right now or saying or touting that he's the best one. Yeah. In doing that process, psychologically as a human being, I already have trust in Michael. I already believe that he's telling me the right thing. He doesn't have to sell me anything.
Yep.
I'm going to still buy from people, no matter the content marketing, the podcast, anything like that. I'm going to buy for a person. And I think that's why you're starting to see brands become more human. You're doing a video podcast right now because we want to see each other's faces. Right. We are psychologically drawn towards that. So a message that's higher rich in media like this, where it's video, is going to connect more deeply. It's going to be more personal. And so that's the extension of the human brand, and why your inbound has to be empathetic to their problems. It has to educate. It has to lead with value, and it can't always be selling. It doesn't mean you can't have a call to action wrapped around your website.
Right.
That's, of course, why you might be doing these things.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean you have to be so hardcore about selling your company.
Yeah, it's really giving first, right? It's value first. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head with trust. The axiom, we do business with people we know, we like, and we trust. And really, I think the difference between, kind of a cold interaction with a brand and one that is referred by a friend or somebody we trust is that trust factor. It's borrowed trust, right? If I say, hey, Adam, I need to get my car replaced, or my carburetor, I have a problem with my engine, where should I go? There might be 20 places nearby, but if you tell me to, drive across town because you really trust this guy, I'm going to pass those 20 auto shops to get to that guy because there's a transfer of trust because I trust you. And so really at the end of the day, I think it's ultimately about the authority as an expert, as you described, of being able to communicate, like this is who we are, this is what we do. We have chops around this area, but then we're willing to give you something. We're willing to help you. And in an environment where there's no brands doing that, you can afford to not do that. But in an environment where every brand or almost every brand or many of your competitors are having that give first mentality, and if now you're not doing that, that puts you at a distinct disadvantage. So I think it's really important to. I've dealt with CEOs and business owners that they don't get it. Like, wait a minute, are we supposed to be selling? Aren't we supposed to be like pitching, right? Like, aren't we supposed to be closing? Aren't we supposed to be like, where's the, get them in a headlock and shove product in their face kind of a approach? And sometimes it's difficult to cast a vision for, no, this is really a different sort of thing that we're trying to accomplish here. It's not going to have instant effect, but it does, like you say, have a long-term effect. And I think when you step back and can appreciate what it is that content marketing and inbound marketing is trying to accomplish in its own right, rather than comparing it to an outbound sales model or a direct sales model, it puts it in context, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I can tell you though, however, even that outbound side is getting closer to that inbound mentality, because you have to still lead with value. I guarantee you that your prospects know a lot about your company even before your first sales call. At least they should. And they're going to be able to do their own research and make a decision without you. The invisible sales process continues to ratchet up in percentage. A couple years ago it was 80%. It's now up to 90%, where people can easily research everything about your company. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to review places.
Right.
And I think that's why you and I are really, when we talk to business owners, we're saying, let us talk to your customers, because we want to hear what they have to say, because they're going to sell you best. And when you're in that outbound process, if you're a smarmy sales guy who's just trying to sell and not lead with value, then I think you're less effective. And so that's why we're even seeing some of that outbound activity include some of that mentality as well.
Mm-hmm. Man, I feel like, Adam, we could talk all day and we could geek out on marketing, although I like to keep it high level for our business owner audience that aren't necessarily in the marketing discipline themselves, but rely on marketers and want to buy marketing intelligently. And I think that that's part of my goal here as well for the audience, is to understand the categories, understand the vocabulary, understand what's at stake, because it's going to make you a better buyer of marketing, whether you're hiring an internal marketing employee, whether you're hiring a fractional marketing executive like myself, whether you're dealing with agencies or freelancers. Being a more educated buyer is going to make for better decision making, and so that's my heart and that's my goal in this. And I do want to talk about Turvo and hear about. You made the change. Tell us about Turvo. You've been there, I think, a few months now, and what is the Turvo platform? How does it enter into that supply chain and logistics category that you were describing when we first started to talk?
Yeah, kind of think back to the PPE supply chain and the desperation around that, right? And the amount of, first of all, sourcing that must happen to find actual PPE. And then, of course, the coordination of vetting that supplier out and then getting them into your network and getting them into where they can ship it to an inbound facility, and then having a facility or a warehouse in and of itself that's ready to receive that, and then communicating with those people at that facility to get it to maybe a distribution center that then is staged to get it into the hands of a clinic network, whether that's hospitals or freestanding emergency rooms or doctors' offices or those kinds of things. So even in explaining that, I've already included probably hundreds of people, right? And so if you times that, let's say you're a big entity, let's say you're Stanford Health or one of the Cleveland clinics, that's tens of thousands of people and entities in a network, right? And so what Turvo does is almost like the Google Enterprise scenario, where you instantly have a suite of Google Docs to invite your people in to collaborate around that. And that's more, Google Doc, Google Sheet centric. Turvo, sort of like the supply chain, brings that network together all within one platform to handle the processes of getting from the suppliers that inventory into that facility, from that facility into that distribution center, from that distribution center into its end destination, whether it be a clinic or emergency room. And now you may have, let's say it's Cleveland Clinic is that main user of Turvo who's wanting to bring in all of those players. Well, all of those players do not have to buy Turvo. They are instantly invited into that instance. They're called tenants. And there are a lot of we put a lot of emphasis on smart search so you can find anything contextually. I think no matter what we do today, we're probably getting all used to searching in a platform for something. So that's very smart and easy to find stuff. There are tasks that you can assign people. There are built-in supply chain processes around inventory, orders, managing shipments. And you can, obviously more efficiently focus on the process and working on it together where everybody's informed. And what that allows them to do is stop wasting time in communicating in outside platforms like text or email or even WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. Consolidate that into one. It also integrates in all of their supply chain systems, right? So we're getting and pulling in all of that data, and the execution of those processes can be done within one platform. And at the end of the day, what does that allow you to do? stop having to be so desperate in the process of acquiring and delivering PPE, and start focusing on being there for those people who need the PPE, where it's a person experience, right? Where customer experience, whether it's a clinic or let's say you're, Ulta who needs something to be responsive to no stores. No matter whether you're PPE, your Ulta, or whoever, you're going to have to coordinate this customer experience. And if everybody's on the same page, everybody's been working together, everybody has a single version of the truth, then it's a lot less time wasted on getting people up to speed or onboarded and more time focusing on the customer and the experience. So that's why I joined Turvo. It's really that altruistic, real world, analog, digitized into a platform.
And that brings us full circle to what we were talking about earlier with companies that have to make a decision about how they're going to respond to a customer experience. I'll call it a problem, but I think you know what I mean by that. It's a challenge. There's a gap. There's a gap between customer expectation and what I can deliver as a business. And we talked about, taking something and creating an analog something and creating its digital twin earlier. The question 25 years ago would be how much is it going to take for us to build this internally? And then how are we going to get everybody, all the stakeholders, all the people you described along that journey bought into this and adopting that product? But the beautiful thing about the SaaS world that we live in is there's companies like Turvo, or another client of mine. There's companies like Dealer Credit Resources. A client are creating these platforms available at a fraction of the cost. I mean, a small fraction of the cost of what it would take to build it. So the build-buy decision becomes very, very easy. These entities actually don't need to build anything. Turvo's built it. Dealer Credit Resources has built it. And there's many other, whatever vertical or part of the market or part of the economy, there's all of these marketplaces that are bringing stakeholders together because they share a common journey. And that journey needs to be an elegant one where communication is fluid. There's no confusion about who has the baton. In this case, a product that needs to be shipped, but in the case of another client, who owns the credit application to get to the end of the funding process. Whatever that baton happens to be, there's an opportunity for companies out there who want to be startups to disrupt a clunky, old, paper-based, disjointed, siloed process. And it sounds like Turvo really has its eye set on doing that in this industry.
Absolutely. And it is a different way of looking at the supply chain. I think the supply chain has existed for such a long time, and many, many industries have been like this, where we find a problem and a system gets built around a single problem. And as that system proliferates in usage and more people buy it, the problem that started occurring, if we look at the TMS space, which Ceresys was a part of, is that, it's also got to talk to this other point solution.
TMS is a transportation management system, right?
Yeah. And so you still have the problem of, I have 97 systems I'm using and they don't talk to each other, and it's all still taking a lot of time. And in fact, it's causing a lot more issues. And in fact, that's what I wrote about in the Journal of Commerce in an op-ed I had recently, where I said, we're creating a problem here. Logistics technology is great, but if we don't start simplifying the amount and the number of systems we're using, it's going to cause an even worse problem than not having them at all, because people just want to get their job done. That's the reality. And they don't want to have to log into 87 different screens and communicate 87 different ways. Our brains just don't like it. We want it to be simple and clean, and we want to communicate effectively. And that's what these SaaS platforms are doing. And, we had our launch with Ryder recently here at the end of May. And Ryder is, a public company. They are massive transportation solutions provider, and they have adopted through their rider share program is built on the Turvo platform. And for them, they decided to do this instead of build it on their own. One, because we put $50 million into it and about 200 developers working on this platform. So we're constantly innovating and continuing to add deeper features that continue to get your job done more effectively. But that's just a testament to build versus buy.
Right.
Could Ryder buy it? I mean, build it. They got the money.
Right.
But they need to focus on their customer and their business value. And Turvo is going to help them build it for them. So they don't have to. They can just leverage it, get to the market as soon as possible and start giving that value to their customers. And they're going to use it as a market differentiation.
Yep. Yeah. So every company doesn't need to be a software company, is what I hear you saying. But every company does need to have a digital strategy and an understanding of how software and how the digitization process is going to be incumbent upon them if they want to compete with their peers going forward.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think it just takes, can you find a platform to run your whole business? I would encourage you to see. And if you can't, how can you, when you do take an assessment at your processes where I outlined earlier, what of those processes can be done with a similar system? And what of those processes involve other entities, and can those entities be brought into that system? And for my business as a marketing consultant, where I helped with content marketing, I had to produce content, and so it was inherently important that I brought my clients into that process. One, I wanted them to have transparency into my process because I wanted to build trust. But they also had tasks I needed to assign them in order for us to get to a point of publishing and distributing content.
That's right.
And so I found Monday.com. It wasn't very expensive. I could invite people in. They were able to see the process and also do work around the process to us get to a final point of delivery. Yeah. So, I was able to find that platform that did 90% of everything, and I didn't have to communicate outside of it. Yep. I think eliminating all communication with outside platforms is impossible because we're people and we do what we like. But I think when it comes to your day-to-day work, a majority of the work can happen in a platform. And I think you should challenge yourself to find that to take up most of your time so you can declutter your own technology use.
Yep. I think we'll leave it at that, Adam. It's been a fascinating conversation. We could probably go all day. Glad to see how you've landed at Turvo, and I think, man, they're so lucky to have you. That's not just lip service, and appreciate your time on the podcast today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Marketing Trail Guide podcast. Next time, I'll be talking with Rich Kokuzo about the people, processes, and performance of successful sales organizations. If you found this episode valuable, please give us a 5-star review and hit the subscribe button for more on how to find and benefit from opportunities in crisis. You can find the notes for this week's episode, plus all of our existing episodes and much more content at marketingtrailguide.com.